As part of the National Homestead Act of 1862, August Coates and his family were among the first to settle in the wooded area which would later become known as Hermantown. According to the late Hermantown historian Art Fichtner, in 1867, Coates, along with his friend Pat Ocker, hauled their possessions with St. Bernard dogs along what is now Hermantown Road, making their way to their new homesteads. In 1872, Coates had filled the requirements of the Homestead Act of living on and improving the land for 5 years. This allowed Coates to be the first to be granted a homestead. By 1875, according to the Coates family history, the township of Herman consisted of 33 families, or a total of 120 residents. Over the next 15 years, the family names of Bjorlin, Martin, Stebner, Erickson, and Ugsted, among others, became familiar as residents of the township of Herman. The town of Herman's population had boomed, and by the turn of the century held a population of 625 residents.
My earliest memories of them are when we visited in their home on the Maple Grove Road. They had sold their homestead on the Solway Road in 1903 and bought 5 acres about half-mile west of Five Corners. I do not know if they built the house or if it was there when they made the purchase. It was a small 3-room cottage with a nice veranda, which could be easily seen on the various pictures that were taken on their golden wedding anniversary party in 1907. Laura Sundquist, 1990.
Like many of the early immigrants of America, many of the early residents of the town of Herman were Europeans fleeing their homeland because of poor economic condition or because of fear of their own government.
But my grandfather had taken a name off of he couldn't read or write, none of them could. But he was one of these little cocky little guys, and so he took the name off of an officer. He wasn't going to take the name off of just any old soldier. And that's the way they came to this country. And mostly the reason my grandparents told me that mostly the reason they came up to Duluth was because they all had came to the United States. They all ended up in Chicago, but then they all came up here because they were afraid that Germans were going to come and look for them for deserting the army. And of course, they figured if they got back up here in the woods, they'd never find them, which they never did.
My father came to America and he settled in Hermantown about, it would be about 70 years ago, and he came from the old country or the Scandinavian countries, and he lived on his property over 50 years, and he lived to be 100 years old.
The early pioneers were hard-working people who sacrificed everything they had to come to this land and build a settlement. Most of the early pioneers had very little money, so they had to work hard to survive.
Well, the early pioneers were quite rugged. My grandfather was great in sawmill work. He owned a sawmill, and there was a lot of timber, of course, around.
I think my first memory of Hermantown would be that to come out there, and at that time, and the massive growth of pine trees. Everything was just, this whole area here was, I can remember, was just one big massive forest. And you can't imagine it now because it's all been cut over, and so much has been done to make it what they call civilization.
When the logging came through Hermantown in the early 1900s, they cleared everything to make way for more settlements that would later grow together to become the city of quality living.